Welcome. It's time to write your opening. Your opening is where we meet your characters and we set promises for your readers. So I'm going to talk about the stuff you need to establish, but the order in which you establish it is up to you. The key here is that your reader wants to be oriented. So every reader is going to want to know something about where they are, when they are, and why they should care. They want to feel grounded. There are two basic types of opening. There's an action-driven opening and there's a voice-driven opening. So an action-driven opening is when we begin with a character doing something. I am going to show you the opening of Ghost Talkers. So this is my character, Ginger Stuyvesant. The Germans were flanking us at Deville Wood when I died. Ginger Stuyvesant had a dim awareness of her body repeating the soldier's words to the team stenographer. She tried to hold that awareness at bay along with the dozens of other spirit circles working for the British Army. So she's doing something. She's actively engaged in talking to a spirit at this point. That's an action-driven opening. A voice-driven opening, on the other hand, begins when we have a narrator who is describing something, and they're describing something that is important to them and thematically connected in some way to the thing. I'm going to paste in a very familiar and famous voice-driven opening. Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 98 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that they still think digital watches are a pretty neat idea. Nothing is happening here. This is all just voice. This is all just describing a thing. So this starts very far out and zooms in. You can do that with a voice-driven opening. And there's a bunch of different ways. You can also just start on a tiny, tight focus to begin with. Both of these are totally fine openings, totally fine modes, but it depends on which one you are more attracted to as a reader. In both cases, what your reader wants is to be oriented. They want to know where they are, when they are, and something about the tone or mood of the piece. Exercise number 1. We are going to write 2 different openings. In the first one, you're going to write an action-driven opening in which your character is doing a thing. And then we're going to later write a voice-driven opening. So let's talk about how to write an action-driven opening. In your first 3 sentences, try to include where, who, and genre. And who kind of includes their mood as well. Genre includes time. So first 3 lines, you're going to try to get in where, who, and genre. And to do that, you're going to use character. You're going to use point of view for this. So what defines your character? Like, I can talk to you all day about axes of power and things like that. But for our purposes, what you're going to be looking for is kind of their definition, sort of an adjective and a noun. Spunky teenage jockey. That kind of adjective and noun tell you something about their attitude. That's what the adjective is. And the noun tells you what their role is. Those 2 things affect the way people view the world. So a cheerful baker is going to be delighted that there's a stick of butter on the counter because that is the perfect thing for spreading on toast. An irritable painter is going to be so annoyed when they walk into the exact same kitchen because the painting on the wall is completely crooked and who hung it at that height anyway. These things can help you make decisions about what senses you're activating in point of view and what your character is noticing and how they feel about it. Location. So I said you needed to do who and where and when. So where is try linking a sensory detail to the location. So rather than she stood in the battleship's engine room, go for something like the thrum of the battleship's engines resonated through her feet. And then there's genre. Get your genre specific detail in as fast as possible, preferably in the first 3 lines. Like the thrum of the battleship's engines resonated through her feet as she tried to repair the warp core. Warp core is a genre-specific detail, and it's very different than the thrum of the battleship's engines resonated through her feet as she tried to refill the lift balloon of the Zeppelin. Those are two different genres. So try to get those three things in the first three lines: who, where, and genre. For those of you watching this video at home, set your own timer and bring yourself back in 5 minutes. So this time we're going to do a voice-driven opening. Basically what you're going to do is you're going to pick a concrete thing that fascinates you. This can be a location, a person, an object. The thing about a voice-driven opening is that voice, the sound of the language, that rumination on an object is the driving thing. There's a couple of tricks that can help catch that reader. The first is if the voice has a clear cadence. So if you think about the style of the voice, are you thinking about something that has a Wagnerian style, like Poe or Dr. Seuss? You can think about somebody else's aesthetic and use that as kind of a model. But really what you want to be thinking about is like what stylistically is going to support the kind of story that you're telling. You don't know the plot yet of your story, but you know the feel of the story. You know the ride that you want to be on. So if you think about like what stylistically is going to support that ride, that's something that you can try to incorporate into that voice-driven opening. Another thing that you can look for is kind of like, what is the big issue? Why do we care about this? Are we looking at issues of something like love or death or life or safety? Like, what is it that is giving us a sense of urgency? What is important about this? Why are we asking the reader to focus on whatever this is? Like, why are we being asked to focus on a pale blue-green planet that's insignificant in the beginning of Hitchhiker's Guide? You also want to have story questions, like what do you want the reader to start wondering about? This is a place where you can start dropping those in, making them go, why are digital watches only insignificant and pretty neat? What? This is obviously coming from the point of view of someone who is off the planet. Whose POV is this? And then mood. Like one of the things that the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy opening does really well is it conveys the mood, the tone of that thing. So what mood do you want the piece to have? Do you want the reader to be going in with a sense of dread? Do you want them to be slightly amused? How do you want them to feel as they go into that? Because the tone of that is going to help them set that for the reader. And then the last kind of tool that you can use is how present your narrator is. So something that's told in first person, that narrator is extremely present. They are sharing a space with the reader. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the narrator is quite present in that there's a very distinct voice to it, but they don't exist in any sort of, like, you don't have any sense of that being a person. So what you're looking for with that is kind of how involved in the story that narrator is. Are they an actor in the story or are they an observer? So with all of that in mind, and those are just tools, you're going to write a voice-driven opening. And this time you're going to take the same opening that we just did. And remember, we want that reader to feel grounded. Okay. So you're going to write 3 sentences. I'm going to give you 5 minutes and good luck. Now, my bet is that some of you are like, oh, yes, voice-driven opening. Now that makes sense to me. This is the thing that I resonate with. And some of you are like, oh, no, action-driven opening. Yes, this makes sense to me. This is the thing I resonate with. And some of you may have been like, oh, I like both of these. The point is to try both of these tools out. Either will work. The beautiful thing about starting a story is that you can come back and swap out later if you want to.